All right. Welcome everybody to this webinar on Latinos making waves in alternative proteins in the space. It's a fascinating space, and I'm going to share some slides with you in a second to get our event started. All right. So I'm Diana. I'm from Bolivia. I used to work at the Inter-American Development Bank, and I'm now the director of ESG and impact for emergence at Wield & Co. It's an impact-driven tech and M&A banking team based in New York City, and we are bridging the gap between traditional finance and digital assets. And one of our key verticals is in sustainable food, based on the premise that the population is growing, food production resources are limited, such as land, and our task is really to improve yield sustainably in order to ensure the responsible use of resources and meet the dietary needs and the nutrition for everybody while caring for our planet. And today is our fourth event on food innovation that we are hosted. And I'm really delighted to moderate this panel with amazing Latin American leaders in the space who will tell their stories and their involvement in how they are impacting the global food tech industry. We will discuss opportunities for investors, entrepreneurs, and consumers, given that there's been a lot of excitement about alternative proteins to support the environment, and that the industry has experienced a lot of growth globally. Today, we're going to talk about Latin America as a region and how it plays an important role in this context because it's an important center of agricultural production. Products include many of the key inputs for alternative proteins, and the population is shifting its interest in diets from being heavily reliant on traditional animal-based proteins to plant-based proteins. And there's a larger effort overall to decarbonize Latin America and the Caribbean as an economic region. And in the plant-based industry alone, this could add about 19 million new jobs, which is a significant impact to the economic development of the region. Surveyed consumers from another study showed that 90% of the population in Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Peru showed that their population wants to add more plant-based foods to their diet. So please ask questions throughout this webinar. I'll be leading Q&A along with Brian, whom I'll introduce shortly, and raising questions and comments. And we're also gonna have some questions for you. So I'm gonna move it on to our panelists and have them introduce themselves, starting with Brian, the CEO of EFFV, Raquel from the Good Food Institute, Arturo Elizondo from Clara Foods, and Gonzalo Ramirez, entrepreneur and former CEO at Louis Dreyfus. So let's get started with Brian. Oh, should be playing this.
Oh, and I was on mute. Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Diana. Thanks for the kind intro. I noticed I'm the only one that doesn't have a Latin flag on that page.
Well, you're an honorary Chilean.
I'm an honorary member, yeah. So yeah, I think we're well represented here. Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Bolivia, super excited. It's not Latinos, it's Latinos y Latinas making waves in the alternative protein. This is one of our kind of our brainchilds. This is our fourth webinar around alternative proteins. And I'm very happy that Raquel, Arturo, and Gonzalo have agreed to join us for this webinar. So I'm Brian Rusick, co-founder and CEO of Earth First Food Ventures, and we focus on channeling capital into the opportunities in the space worldwide, not just in Latin America, around alternative proteins.
Got some slides for you.
Our focus, Diana, is around profit with purpose. And we do that in 3 fields within alternative protein. The first is, of course, and which has been around now for 10 years plus, is plant-based assets, and followed on what will soon be, what, in our opinion, 2 very large verticals: cellular agriculture and fermentation as alternative proteins, not plant-based, but alternative proteins, following our thematics around the future of protein production with a diminishing reliance on traditional animal proteins. And we think that that is the future of the space. While it won't be the majority of protein out there, we do think it's moving from a paltry 2% currently to 11, 16, 20% over the next 15 years. And these are not insignificant numbers by any means. I don't know if I have delay on my screen, Diana, but I've already kind of walked through this as a quick introduction. I think I'd like to turn it over to our panelists, starting with Raquel, for personal introduction on her side, and our ongoing partnership with GFI is so important for us because GFI is a nonprofit and they're leading the space in bringing capital, entrepreneurs, executives, founders, and corporates, even incumbents, into the space to move the needle from current 2% to hopefully that projected 20%. Diana, Raquel, over to you to introduce yourself, GFI, and kick off your slides.
Yes, thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody. I'm Raquel. I'm Corporate Engagement Manager at GFI Brazil. It's a big pleasure to me stay here with you. Thank you so much for this invite. So next slide, please. Thank you. For those not yet familiar with our organization, the Good Food Institute is a no-profit that is dedicated to accelerating the shift to a sustainable, healthy, and just food system. We are founded by philanthropy and have earned Guide Stars Platinum Seal of Transparency, and an honor obtained by less than 1% of no-profit. It's a good achievement for us. Our organization employs over 100 staff around the globe, and we have 3 programmatic departments. So first is science and technology. Our team of scientists work to advance open source science of alternative protein. Corporate engagement is my area. We work to build relationship with companies, restaurants, retailers, investors, and startups. We also provide support to industry entrepreneurs and farmers. And policy, our policy team advocates for fair regulation of plant-based and cultivated meat and fermentation, and lobbies for government investments in sustainable protein R&D. So this is our a resume for our work. Next, please. And everything is to answer these key questions that is so important. How we will feed 10 billion people by 2050, and of course sustainably, efficiently, and safely. This is our quick question and move our work. Next, please. So we believe that alternative protein can be a great solution for this challenge, and in our scope, this is mean plant-based, the technology to deliver the food that the people love, so meat, dairy, and egg, but made from vegetables. Cultivated meat, made from cells reproduction, and fermentation, making products and amazing ingredients from this technology. Next, please. In science and technology, I would like to share with you some GFI's achievements in these 4 years in Brazil. We have an annual grant where GFI invests in science. Last year, we invest in 3 researchers in Brazil, and this year we expect more projects approved for our region. So this is so great for us and looking for our region. Next, please. There are some organizations that we work here to promote the alternative protein market with some great results. So you can see more about our work in some specific knowledge areas. Next, please. Now, after an investment from an organization called CLUA, we are working to study how can we use indigenous ingredients in plant-based market. So we are mapping potential ingredients, and in the next months, probably we will open a call for research. So this is a nice work that we are working now. Next, please. So this is our market today, looking for plant-based in Brazil. We had 30 products launched after GFI's consultancy. More than 30 companies and 57 startups received GFI support. We made 4 pitch days with retailers and investors involving 19 startups. Our products are arriving in more than 25 countries around the world. And the right side of this slide, you can see of these companies that are making this happen. So we have great companies that are looking for this market and operating now. Next, please. In March, we had this great news with BRF announced their partnership with Fale Farms to produce cultivated meat in Brazil. They were the first company to announce the production of this technology here, and GFI had the pleasure to be part of this process, this negotiation. We are working with other companies, startups, and scientists to promote an ecosystem in cultivated meat. We need to connect many stakeholders to increase this market here. We are also engaging stakeholders initially out of this market, but with the knowledge that can be used in this sector. We believe that this can be important for this market. That is the same with fermentation. Now this marketing is really early stage in Brazil, and we will talk a little bit more about this. So we are working to promote this technology, including to connect companies and startups with a high level of technology, interested in licensing the technology for Brazil. This is a great opportunity here. Next, please. I think this is almost the end. We are working on many fronts, but I would like to highlight in our work in partnership with one of the reference in technical knowledge in Brazil, the ITAU, to build a study with information that will support the public sector in create a new regulatory mark for alternative protein. This is so important for us, for the companies, startups, and everybody, and all the market can advance it in this market. And we're creating a work group inside of the Brazilian Bio-Innovation Association to discuss topics of importance for our sector, such as taxes and regulations and some topics like that. Nowadays, more than 30 companies should be part of this group. And you can see this company, a few companies in this slide. So this is it. Next, please. I think this is it. Yeah, we are working. Actually, we are working hard to promote the alternative protein market in Brazil, and of course, looking for how we can broaden our work in all Latin America. And this is it. If I can support you with any demand, I'm here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Raquel. That was very insightful. And moving on now to Arturo, as basically heading Clara Foods, which is an amazing initiative in itself. Could you walk us through first the process and the concept of plant-based fermentation and the story of Clara Foods?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share more.
And welcome back, Arturo.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me. And yeah, really excited to be here and represent. So Clara Foods, we're one of the oldest companies in this space. We use fermentation to make real animal proteins without using a single animal. And as crazy as it sounds, the technology has been around for 40 years to make proteins like insulin for diabetics and rennet for mass market cheese across the world. And the way the technology works is that in the same way that brewers use yeast to convert sugar into alcohol to make beer or wine, or that bakers use yeast to convert sugar into carbon dioxide to leaven bread, there's yeast that actually can convert sugar into protein. And so we work with that protein and can actually hack and design that yeast to make specific kinds of proteins. And we've used our yeast to produce different kinds of animal proteins, but specifically starting off, we focus on egg proteins because they're incredibly functional and incredibly nutritional. And all these companies, Raquel did a great job outlining some of the corporate engagement, and that's on a global level. So many companies, because of the work that companies like Beyond and Just and Impossible have really done to help educate the consumers more broadly, is that it's really woken up the sleeping giants, right? All the big food companies, the Nestle's and the Tysons and the General Mills and the Kellogg's and Grupo Bimbos of the world, to actually transition and want to ride the alternative protein wave, like the structural trend in the industry. And ultimately, all these companies want to replace their eggs, but they can't, because eggs are incredibly functional and are very hard to replace. It's hard to get a cake to rise without using an egg to make cookies and bind those products together. And so we want to expand the toolkit and the ingredients that companies use to make it much easier to make that transition without having to compromise the taste and nutrition and texture that consumers know and love. I grew up on both sides of the US-Mexico border, in Texas and in Mexico. And, I grew up eating my 2 eggs for breakfast every morning, like any good Mexican, and my barbecue every Sunday, like any good Texan. And when I transitioned to a plant-based diet, I was surprised at how unstraightforward it was. And that, it was hard going back home, and I saw that I had challenges with my family and thought, well, what if I could just make it as easy as possible for them to also transition their diet as well? And I thought through a B2B ingredient company like Clara Foods would be successful at that. So we've been around for 6 years. We launched our first product last year. It was the world's first animal-free pepsin, which comes from pigs normally, and it's found in supplements. And we partner with global ingredients giant Ingredion that distributes in over 120 countries. And then we're launching our second product later this year, which will be the world's first animal-free egg protein. And then next year we'll launch a suite of eggs for the world.
Wow.
To taste.
That's fantastic. So what do you think is the most exciting opportunity in plant-based fermentation in Latin America as a region, Latin America and the Caribbean?
Yeah, I mean, for the beauty of the crystal Latin America is that we consume a lot of animal protein across,
We do, right?
it's whether you're in Brazil or Mexico, Argentina, we lead the world. Like Mexico is the largest consumer of the largest consumption of eggs per capita in the world.
Wow.
Over an egg a day. In Argentina, I think, and Brazil tend to top the list in beef consumption.
They're
And so
famous for, yeah,
they're very famous for
yeah.
the beef, and it's a huge cultural it's a huge cultural tie for us. And so where I see the biggest, ultimately, Latin America has, I think, because animal protein has been such a huge part of that culture for so long, and we represent not a huge part of the global population, and yet from a consumption standpoint, we sort of over-index for that. And I think that's where there's a huge opportunity for us to make a difference. And I think Latin America has, just a huge wealth of resources, and I think some of the most innovative food companies are headquartered here. We work with, from our standpoint, we work with Minerva Foods, one of the largest exporter of beef in Latin America. We work with Grupo Bimbo, the world's largest bakery, headquartered in Mexico City, and Grupo Nutresa, which is Colombia's largest food company. And so we see a huge, a lot of innovation here and a lot of interest from established food companies who really want to be forward thinking and continue to exist, not just for the last 100 years, but for the next 100.
Super,
now,
Arturo. Thanks much.
From the audience.
I wanted to transition a bit to Gonzalo. We're going to come back to Arturo in the Q&A section. I'd like to introduce our third panelist, or have him introduce himself, my good friend Gonzalo Ramirez. Gonzalo, you've got a long history in the industry on both sides of the fence, traditional and now alternative proteins. Why don't you tell us your background and what you're up to today in alternative proteins? And then we're going to come back to the whole floor and open it up for Q&A. Gonzalo.
That's great. Thank you very much, Brian. Pleasure being here. Thanks for the invitation. I started in the agricultural industry. I'm originally from Argentina, and I started in Argentina back in 1985. And that was with my idea I had this intention to produce, but I was feeling it was a little bit boring just to produce. So I wanted to trade a little bit of those agricultural commodities. And then I did my career in trading all the way from 85 to 2000. Still based in Argentina, I moved along to Macquarie Bank, where we structured financial solutions for price risk exposure in agricultural commodities. And it was back in those years, in the 90s, when you would try and think long term and say, where will the needs be and what will happen with production? And there was a very clear scheme where we were saying, from Argentina, Brazil and Argentina should produce the soya of the world, the US should produce the corn, and the Black Sea should produce the wheat. Then, of course, you have other productions in other countries. When you see what happened, and then I joined, Louis Dreyfus in 2005. I started my career in Louis Dreyfus 2005. I ended up as a chief executive officer of Latin America around 2012. Then I went as a CEO of Louis Dreyfus Asia in 2014. Or 15, which is basically what gave me a complete new vision of the way a big portion of the world eats and behaves, and how they see food supply chain and what they want to eat and what they want to know about their food. And then I ended up coming to Geneva, where I live right now, as a global CEO of Louis Dreyfus for 3 years. Then I left the company, and since then, I created my own investment vehicle. It's called Swiss Pampa. It's based here in Geneva. And I've been mainly focused on those small companies. I wish I had met Arturo some years ago, but those small companies that need a little bit of financial assistance, but also of experience to try and engage properly into that path that will put them or accelerate them into success, based on technology applied to producing agriculture and food in a sustainable manner, and replacing damaging parts of the economies of food production. That's what I've been doing up to now. So I'll stop with this, and then you tell me what else you want to know, because I can. It's a
super. Thanks, Gonzalo.
When I'm leaving.
Diana, shall we open up to Q&A to our panelists, and we tag team? You take a question, I'll take a question, and we hit them hard.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, we can go back to why don't we ask a follow-up question for Gonzalo now that we're talking about Louis Dreyfus, and I'll take the first one here, and then we can have a conversation among each other as well, which I think would be the most interactive. I think you all probably have a lot of themes in common, and it would be great to hear your insights for each other. So Gonzalo, given your insight with Louis Dreyfus, and you've seen the evolution of the food tech industry in a really interesting way from a very, very high level, and particularly you have experience also in Asia as a raw material producer, basically. What lessons do you think that the Asian experience would pose for Latin America and the Caribbean to benchmark off of and learn from?
Excellent question, and an extremely long reply that I will compress in a couple of minutes only. But the Asia experience, as I said before, was fantastic. And when I interrupted my comment about how back in the 90s we were trying to understand who would be producing what, that is an explosion of different ideas and verticals that we have right now in the world of food, because what's happening right now, it's amazing. No, many people tend to say that we are living the era of internet right now in food. I tend to believe that it's even better, because back in the late 90s or early 2000, when we were talking about internet, we didn't really know what we were going to be using out of all that technology that was being developed, right? Right now, you know what you need. Yeah. You know what you need. You know what you want to replace. You know what you want to produce. You want what the consumer is looking for. You know where you're going. So now it's about accelerating on the right path of the development of that technology.
And the benefits.
Yeah, right.
And the benefits.
And the benefits, of course, absolutely. And I think the big issue with Asia is that, and depends on what you consider Asia, but you should grab India all the way to China, Japan, and all the Southeast Asian region. That's the area of the world that is growing fastest in the adoption of incorporation of protein to the daily diet. And this is the biggest concern. With an additional element, which is when you look at the way you are producing meat in Asia, you're basically producing the soya that they feed to animals in Asia in the Americas. So this is long-term, this is technically unsustainable. You cannot continue to grow production in the Americas to feed animals in Asia, to feed people in Asia. So the other component is China is the largest importer of soya of the world. Now, in China, you cannot plant GMO beans. And in Europe, you cannot plant GMO beans. But China is the largest importer of GMO beans of the world. And Europe is the largest importer of soya meal coming from soya beans that are GMO to feed all the animals that we eat in Europe. I say we as a component because I'm vegetarian since the last January. So it's extremely interesting what's happening in Asia, because for me, the particular thing to look at is the discussion that we are starting to have again about prices of commodities, agricultural commodities, and are we burning food for fuel? Keep this in mind, because this will arise many times in the years to come. And it's very interesting if you can produce, you have the vertical of food and the vertical of energy. And if we can go the way Arturo is going, which is try not to compete with those needed renewable fuels while we transition the energy matrix into all renewable fuels, making sure that you don't burn corn, sugar, soya, canola, palm oil, etc., to run cars and trucks. Then China is the largest importer of soya. Today is one of the largest importers of corn and is the largest importer of crude oil. And they need to clean China technically. They want to bring a cleaner China. And they have the money to invest into solar panels, wind generation, hydraulic generation, etc. And on top of that, they have the money to expand in plant-based food. And on top of that, they have the money to expand into cellular reproduction, meat production. So if China has that power, what may eventually happen with the impacts that you end up having in the Americas on the agricultural matrix production? For me, that is one of the biggest questions that we have in front of us. If China and the rest of Asia transform quickly the way they produce the food that they consume every day, what does that mean as an impact to the Americas? This is the biggest question.
Yeah.
And I think companies like Clara Foods will continue to succeed big time because they're going into a vertical where, as Arturo said, you're producing products out of animals without killing an animal. This is fantastic.
Mhm.
So with that, I finish.
Thanks, Gonzalo. Great comment on what does it mean for the Americas if China switches to alternative proteins, or Asia as a whole, which leads me kind of a segue, Raquel, to you. We'll get to Arturo. Raquel, but for you, the announcement of the alliance between BRF, Brazil Foods, and Aleph, that's a big statement. You've got one of the world's biggest protein producers from traditional animal protein tag teaming with cellular agriculture. How does that play out? In particular, how does it play out for Brazil? With respect to Gonzalo's recent comment of what's the impact going to be on the Americas if Asia switches to alternative protein? What are the chances of Brazil switching from animal protein to cellular agriculture? The alliance, it says something. What does it say to you, and how does it play out in your opinion?
Yes, for sure. Of course, the Asia is what happened in Asia reflected in all the world. In Brazil specifically, we are a big supplier for Asia. So everybody always is looking for this region. And in Brazil is the same, and for our companies is the same. So now we are seeing that the companies in Brazil are looking for diversify their portfolio. So if my consumer wish animal protein, I have. If my consumer wish plant-based protein or fermentation or cultivated meat, I have. And this diversification is amazing for the consumer, of course, amazing for the environmental and everybody. And the companies understand that the alternative protein is an opportunity for the market. So, and as a opportunity, as a Brazil, as a big agribusiness country, we are seeing to leader this market in all sectors. So in plant-based and in fermentation, or in cultivated meat agriculture, cellular. So this is so important for us. Of course, the BRF announcement, everybody, this is mixed the market, shake the market, of course, but it's just the first announcement. But it's a great announcement that show us how the Brazilian marketing is looking for alternative protein, again, as a opportunity. Of course, another countries like United States and Israel began their works in cultivated meat before us. But this is a interested characters of Brazil, and some Brazilian people sometimes is hard to beginning the things here, especially when we're talking about protein. So we love churrasco, barbecue. We are a big meat consumer, of course. But when our consumers and our companies understand that this can be huge, can be opportunity, we can move really fast. So the plant-based market have 2 years in Brazil, and we already exported the products for 25 countries. So this is so big, and I think this movement can be the same with cultivated meat as we saw in plant-based, and I hope in fermentation too. Fermentation is a big challenge for us. A lot of companies is looking for this now. Unfortunately, we have few entrepreneurs and startups looking for that, but we have a big companies and great companies looking for how they can bring this technology for Brazil.
Great. Yeah, that's great to hear that insight and these updates and the progress. It's very exciting, especially from a country like Brazil, which is one of the bigger and growing companies out of the region. Now, turning it over to regulation and the role of regulation to facilitate and incentivize this progress. And I'm gonna mostly ask it for Arturo, but I'll keep it open for Raquel and Gonzalo to jump in as well, because you've dealt with this issue, I'm sure, as well. But what do you think are the regulatory hurdles or regulatory opportunities to get really implement these changes and get these products in front of consumers, from FDA approvals in the United States to European approvals and Latin American markets in Mexico or other countries?
Yeah, it's a great question, and please feel free to chime in, everyone. From the way that I see it, with the three sort of verticals of plant-based, cell-based, and fermentation-based, plants and fermentation, where we fall in, very straightforward, fortunately, because rennet was the first ever animal protein approved by the FDA 30 years ago and is now sold globally. There's really strong precedent for proteins from fermentation to be approved in the food supply. Obviously, plants have been, there's been a very straightforward path to market there for a long time. And so for fermentation, very, very similar. And so we get grandfathered in to most of the existing regulatory framework that exists today. On the cell-based approach, that's a little bit more complicated, and that's where in the USDA there's shared, in the US there's shared jurisdiction between the USDA and the FDA. I'm not sure how that actually plays out in the rest of Latin America, but the nice thing about with the FDA is that a lot of Latin American countries tend to have pretty almost like equivalence standards with the FDA, where it gets approved there. Oftentimes it's a much shorter regulatory pathway to enter those markets. I think Brazil is a little different in that respect. And so Raquel, you can comment on that.
Yeah, please go ahead, Raquel.
Yes, for sure. So we are working with Itaú. It's a big reference here. It's a university, but it's a big reference in technical knowledge, because we are working with the government to understand what type of information they need to make decisions. So we talk with Itaú and contract a study that our intention is provide the government with technical information about regulatory issues. So in three technology, of course, fermentation, plant-based, and cultivated meat. And they will deliver a material with, of course, benchmarking about the regulation around the world, and looking for our regulation and understand what is good, what need some adjustment, or what is necessary to be created. And we will deliver this material for the government and promote some discussions to support them in their path. They are really, really open in this way. This is a good news. They understand how the alternative protein can mean innovation for our country inside the agribusiness. Again, the Brazil is really proud about our agribusiness. So now the government see alternative protein as one more work inside the agribusiness. So they are working really close to us to promote this market, understand how they can support the companies, the entrepreneurs, the investors to advance in this market.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Raquel. Awesome. Gonzalo, over to you. Since you've been around the globe and on different continents and regions, what do you think is missing in the equation for this industry to go from our current 2% of protein consumption on alternatives to 10, 15, 20 over the next 10, 15 years? What's not lined up, in your opinion? What needs to be lined up that's not there?
have so many replies to that question. Let's see. I think first we need to break down what we talk about when we talk about replacement of animal protein, and what are we talking about? Are we talking on a B2B level like Clara Foods that goes to everyone that needs egg to cook something that then will be eaten? Are we talking about on the line of fermentation? Are we talking about plant-based and how people who want to stop eating maybe part of the meats that they eat, they want to start trying something different like a plant-based patty or a sausage? Are we talking about cellular and lab-grown meat? And this is the one that I think seems to be the most difficult one. I tend to agree with Arturo's comments about approvals. And on top of the approval, I would add to the fact that you need scientific research, but you also have perception of people. And if the perception is that you are manipulating something there that I will end up eating, maybe we need to do something about the way we inform what we do. And when you think about how healthy it can be, the meat that you can produce on a cellular multiplication lab-grown basis, without vaccination, without hormones, without antibiotics, without illnesses, without virus, without bacteria, without so many things. When you think about what you have inside a chicken nugget, if people really think that you have chicken inside that chicken nugget, we'd better trace down properly what we have there. It's part of a chicken, yes, but I doubt it's the best part of the breast of the chicken. And that's basically how I think we need to evolve in this industry. This is basically by informing people more and more, and we need to do a consistent work about information and without attacking things, but simply explaining why the replacements are coming to do better, because there's a lot of confusion there. For me, to go back to the basics and eat more lentils, more chickpeas, more yellow peas, you know, this is already a big change. And then the big question mark for me is, how will we evolve in the agricultural production in terms of what do we need to produce what? When we think that to eat a steak, we are consuming so much fresh water, so much agricultural land, so much agricultural production, so many carbon emissions, so much blood, bones, lungs, stomach, everything is wasted. I mean, why do we need to produce all that, right? And if you speak with the younger generation, you talk to a 12-year-old guy in Europe. I make this distinction because Asia and Latin America is completely different in this type of conversation, even in that younger generation, because there is an inheritance of what you eat every day. And here in Europe, you have a blend or a confrontation between what you as a Latino come to Europe to and try to feed your kids with every day, and what they bring back from school and from the daily social life, and they tell you, less of this, less of that. So it's not only about plastic, it's also about red meat. It's also about fruit coming all the way from the other side of the globe because of the carbon emissions. So for me, it's about information. It's about evolution on doing things properly. It's about not pushing the boundaries before the time that barriers should open. Plant-based will succeed, fermentation will succeed, no doubt. This is already running. The lab-grown meat is the one that has the biggest challenge, and I think it's the one that will really transform the future. So linked to that is, how do you grow that lab-grown meat? In what? In serum? Do you mix it with feed ingredients that exist today? This is why when I look at the future 20, 25 years out, agriculture can change a lot. Do you need to crush soya and put oil on one side and meal on the other side to feed a cellular multiplicative bioreactor? Or can you give just the beans? Or will you give yellow peas? And then you transform the farm into a regenerative agriculture. And there's an enormous impact that will be happening here, gigantic. And I think plant-based is very clear. There is an enormous tendency to go to beans and yellow peas, and then you have mung beans, and then you have some lentils and chickpeas, etc. But when you think about what you are giving the animals to eat, and remember that one cow eats 7 kilos of feed to produce 1 kilo of meat. I'm using round numbers. Pork, 4 kilos of feed to produce 1 kilo of meat. Chicken, 2 kilos of feed to produce 1 kilo of meat. And fish, 1 kilo to produce 1 kilo. This is basically for the audience how I met Brian, because that day I said, the world needs to eat less red meat, more fish. And then we ended up together discussing a situation where we could eventually grow fish, and not only grow fish, but without antibiotics, in a controlled environment, locally grown, with the recirculation ecosystem. That's the first time that I met Brian. Then I evolved in my way of thinking. Fish needs to be there, but I think plant-based needs to do a much bigger work than what I thought would happen there. And then you have vertical farming, and you have mycelium, and you have how many other things? Sorry, Raquel, go on.
Yeah,
No,
please jump in.
No,
I was going to
like
say, this is indeed how we met, Gonzalo.
Yes, yeah.
It sounds like part of your answer, a big part of your answer is education and awareness is a big part of the equation. And I think that's part and parcel of the initiatives we're doing for these webinars. It's part of the raising the awareness is part of education and spreading the word on the alternatives out there. And I think this is a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, this is
Diana,
so
Raquel? Yeah.
this is so important, and I would like to take advantage that Gonzalo said for make a provocation about how we can introduce our farmers in this scenario. This is so important for everybody, and of course the countries like Brazil and now Latin America. What will be their role in this situation? We can understand how the cultivated meat, for example, will need some raw materials that can be produced in farmers, for example. How our farmers can be in this market. Of course, in plant-based and in fermentation, I believe, Arturo, this match is easier. But when we're thinking about cultivated meat, what is necessary for this market that we can produce in our farmers? I think this is so important to understand how this change of market will impact our farmers, and it's our role thinking about how we can support them in this new market.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Diana, time for last question?
Yeah, I think
Arturo,
one
you wanted
question.
to say
Yeah,
something?
please jump in,
I-
Arturo.
So I think that is an excellent question, and I think what something that Raquel said earlier as well about government and kind of how the Brazilian government is looking at alternative proteins as a core, as part of the agribusiness sector and the leadership. Like I think one thing that I see in terms of to your question, Brian, about accelerating the transition to animal-free protein is really around I think what is how ultimately governments across the world, but I think especially in Latin America, there's a very opportune moment where I think sometimes the gut reaction could be to push and to try and fight it. And I think a lot of these very smart governments, and I think through the education work that GFI has been doing, is how to ultimately partner, because Latin America for a long time has been an agricultural powerhouse. If the government tries to push this and not embrace it, or just does nothing, the innovation will go elsewhere, right? Singapore and other parts across the world are really, are really pushing forward. If the governments in Latin America do not actively cultivate this industry, do not actively support it, this region will get left behind. I think that is a really critical point, that we will lose the agricultural powerhouse that we once were.
Great. Yeah,
Good
thank
comments.
you. And one last point that I will ask if all of you could answer in the last few minutes, and it's a recurring theme that has come up in different ways, but basically the concern of these new foods being too processed, or investors being interested in the space, but concerned about the quality of ingredients? And is it, in the end, maybe there's ingredients that might not be as good for you? How do you address those concerns?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I'll just jump in quickly. The way that I always the way that I always talk about it, and this was, you know, I spent some time in government under the Obama White House, and one of the things that one of the things that people would share is, don't compare. You know, when they would say, well, he's not doing this, he's not perfect, he's not, you know, as he is not perfect. The point that would be made was, don't compare me to the Almighty, compare me to the alternative. And ultimately, I think that is so critical to understand, what are we replacing here? What are the products? And by almost every measure, any product from animal agriculture is industrial animal agriculture is incredibly destructive to our health and to the planet's health, and to the animals that ultimately are sacrificed to produce it. And I think across every measure, the way that I see our products, and I think the way maybe some other companies do as well, is by almost every measure, we are better than the alternative. It may not be perfect, and that's where technology comes in, right? It's hard to get chickens and cows and fish to and optimize those products. But with plants and fermentation and these new technologies, we can make these products cleaner and better. You have Impossible and Beyond.
There seems to be a better harmonization across the board.
And like, you know, the version 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 that get cleaner and cleaner and better and better. And so ultimately, you know, I think that trend is persisting, and consumers continue to push for those. I think that's exactly what we need. And let's not forget that by almost every measure, even the worst animal-free products are by almost every measure better than the industrial animal ag equivalent.
Mm-hmm. It's a world of relativeness.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's important compare again sausage with sausage, burger with burger,
Yes.
equivalents, because sometimes the people compare plant-based burger with salad. It's not the same comparison. Okay, it's really different. We need to compare the equals, and I think so. It's important to understand what is behind the name meat, because sometimes you buy a burger and you see in the ingredients list meat, but it's not meat. Is fiber, muscle, water, and everything that compose this name. And when we're talking about plant-based, for example, the industry tried to replace all this structure with plants. So for protein, you need replace with some types of protein, fiber, and fat. And this is a process, of course. And I think it's important we understand some, of course, when we're talking about animal protein, the people, as Gonzalo said, the people don't have too much knowledge about these products. And when we have a new product, everybody's looking for how this product is made, and everybody and everything like that. So, but it's important, I think, these two things. First, you compare the equals. Second, understand that in plant-based or fermentation, we are replacement all structure, all or parts of this product with plants or fermentation ingredients. So it's a little different, but it's part of industry role. Understand what the consumer wish from this product. So things just like fat and sodium and calories, and this is important for our consumer. Of course, it's different. The demands in a burger is different than in a fillet, for example. But is important, and I believe that the industry is looking hard for this wave.
Exactly. What about you, Gonzalo?
I fully endorse what Arturo said, of course, also Raquel, but I'm super aligned on the evolution of technology and how things will get better and better while we do product number 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, etc. There is a little bit of an issue with the sodium content in those burgers. That's true. Now, when you look at the whole component of that burger versus a burger that comes from a piece of a cow, and then you see all the component of that impact, it's much better the plant-based burger, with the advantage that it will continue to evolve to be a better burger in the future. Then there is one very important issue, which is governments embracing the change or not. If Brazil, to use Brazil as an example, or Argentina, any of the countries that produce a lot of soya and a lot of corn and then a lot of meat, and this is the old traditional agriculture, and you are suffering the consequence of a change that is coming and you will not stop it. If you don't embrace it, you run the risk of Singapore, China embracing it, and they will try and produce meat out of the ingredients that they have in that region. Now, if you put the government on a private-public effort to develop whatever is needed with capital and knowledge and intelligence to what the hell do we need to feed these cells with to make sure that we can produce the meat that the world is looking for, a cleaner meat, with products that we can produce in our region, then you have a win-win situation. If you just say, I don't want to talk about this is bad for my farmers, technology will go somewhere else. And then what if Singapore ends up developing something that fits with tapioca, a fantastic meat produced in a lab for the consumers in Asia? The soya will not see the chance. So that's why you need to embrace it. And I don't want to use famous names in the past with cameras and digital evolution versus the film, but you need to embrace the change and make sure that the change incorporates you into that change, right?
It's inevitable.
Yeah.
All great comments. Diane, I think we're out of time. We're
are.
pushing past the hour here. I'd like to thank our panelists from Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, Bolivia. Super excited to have shared this panel with two women as well. That's very exciting. First time for me in that. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining on this exciting and very important topic. Really appreciate all your insights. And thank everyone in our audience for joining, and everybody have a great evening.
Yeah, and thank you for filling the poll also. So this has been great. It's been great to meet all of you, and we look forward to more. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Take
Bye.
care.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.